Good morning, Cedar Ridge. My name is Gina Richardson, and I'm a member of the board here at Cedar Ridge. Today's God in the Movies is A Hidden Life. It is based on the true story of Franz and Francesca Jagerstatter, who lived a simple, ordinary life as farmers with their family in a small mountain village in Austria. Their story takes place during World War II and shows their deep devotion for God and love for each other, telling their story using letters that they wrote each other. As Franz put it in one of his letters to Francesca, he wrote, "I thought we could build our nest high up in the trees, fly away like birds to the mountains." This first clip highlights daily life in the village before the war. One of the themes of this film is contrast. The rumble of warplanes overhead is a jarring contrast to the secluded sanctuary feel of the village. Franz voted against the annexation of Austria by Germany in 1938, when the rest of the village was for it. In 1940, he was sent to compulsory military training as shown Nazi propaganda films that he finds deeply troubling, and begins to wrestle with the justification for war that conflicts with his Christian beliefs. A few months into training, he is sent home on a deferment because farmers were needed just as much as soldiers, and is troubled to find Nazi officials seeking to influence the villagers to support their cause and to recruit more men for the war effort. He is dismayed to see his neighbors succumb to the influence of the German soldiers. Even the town mayor cautions against disloyalty to the state and urges everyone to pledge their support to the Nazi army. Franz takes refuge in prayer, contemplating the scripture and his devotion to follow Jesus, and conversations with few villagers who also believe that the war is unjust and evil. As one of his contemporaries, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, wrote, "The great masquerade of evil has played havoc with all our ethical concepts. For evil to appear disguised as light, charity, historical necessity, or social justice is quite bewildering to anyone brought up on our traditional ethical concepts. While for the Christian who bases his life on the Bible, it merely confirms the fundamental wickedness of evil." Franz seeks counsel from the parish priest, explaining that he can't go to war if he is called. He can't support the killing of innocent people, the raiding of other countries, and preying on the weak. The priest is sympathetic, but is unable or unwilling to give Franz the answers he is looking for, and suggests that the bishop could provide wiser guidance, but cautions Franz to think about his family, and that he would certainly be shot if he refused to go, and that his sacrifice would benefit no one. In this next clip, Franz meets with the bishop for advice on his concerns about the war. Franz is discouraged by the complacency of the church and said in one of his letters, "If the church stays silent in the face of what is happening, what difference would it make if no church were ever opened again?" This next clip involves a conversation about the difference between admiring and following Jesus. Franz begins to express his objections to the war and to Hitler publicly, but is called a traitor by many of the villagers. They shun him, Francesca and their family, and refuse to help them on their farm or do business with them. Franz endures increased pressure from the mayor, the villagers, and the church to compromise his principles, his conscience, and his faith. Francesca offers encouragement to him when she says, "When have our prayers not been answered? If we're faithful to him, he'll be faithful to us. I believe it." I recall two job-related incidents some years ago when a few co-workers and I voiced concerns about working conditions in our department and agreed to protest by not going to work for one day. The other took place during a job evaluation when I was told by a supervisor that I had to spy on some of my coworkers. Knowing that my answer could reflect negatively on my review, I absolutely refused, stating what would be against my principles to do such a thing. I put my faith in God and not in what a supervisor would or would not do. I soon left that company. As James 1:22 says, "Be doers of the word and not hearers only." In this clip, the dreaded day comes when Franz receives the letter calling him to military duty in February of 1943. In March 1943, Franz reports for service, leaving Francesca to struggle tending to the farm with only the help of her older sister and her mother-in-law. He refuses to take the oath, is arrested and sent to prison. He endures extreme harsh treatment and persecution during his imprisonment, as he is continually pressured to give up. Franz's refusal to give in to pressure to compromise his faith and to stand against injustice seems pointless in his time. In many ways, Franz's story echoes Jesus' journey to the cross, as he remains faithful to what he believes God is calling him to do. As Romans 5:3-4 says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope." Franz is court-martialed and sentenced to death on July 6, 1943. In his defense of the trial, he said that there were some things in which one must obey God more than men, due to the commandment, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." He said he could not fight with a weapon. The title of the movie, A Hidden Life, comes from a line in George Eliot's Middlemarch. The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not as ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. The things that are not so ill with us are the result of people we'll never hear about, making sacrifices for people they never know and who never know them. 1 Corinthians 15:58. "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." I am reminded of our dear friend and Cedar Ridger, Mary Brewster, who passed away a few years ago. A message left on her obituary page in the Washington Post expressed this sentiment beautiful. "Miss Mary, a person that we hardly knew, because we happened to be her son's neighbors, showed us that you can help any time. We always said hello to each other. My daughter had a 5th grade project about Washington, D.C., which we told her. She went back home, and 1 week later, a package for my daughter arrived. All the information from Washington, D.C., including old tickets from museums, were in that big envelope. The school presented my daughter's project to all the community. Miss Mary reached people she didn't know. Still does it." Throughout the film, we see lush green hills, valleys with rivers and streams of water, and majestic vistas of rolling golden grain that seem to speak of God's presence. Cloud covers mountains that thunder and flash with lightning, overlook the village as if God is brooding over a world out of control. We hear both Franz and Francisca's heartfelt prayers of both devotion and doubt as they struggle to find answers. We hear the voice of Francesca wondering in prayer if God is ever even listening, and if she faithfully knocks, will the door be open. Francesca is able to visit Franz briefly after he is sentenced. Previously, she had tried to change his mind, but now she tells him that she will support him no matter what he decides to do. From a letter Franz wrote in prison. "Just as the man who thinks only of this world does everything possible to make life here easier and better, So must we too. We believe in the eternal kingdom, risk everything in order to receive a great reward there. But with this difference, we need no rifles or pistols for our battle, but instead spiritual weapons, and the foremost among these is prayer. Through prayer we continually implore new grace from God, since without God's help and grace it would be impossible for us to preserve the faith and be true to His commandments. Let us love our enemies, bless those who curse us, pray for those who persecute us, for love will conquer and will endure for all eternity. And happy are they who live and die in God's love. In the last clip, Franz is visited by a court-appointed lawyer with a deal to have him serve in a hospital instead of on the battlefield. John 12:25, unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never any more than a grain of wheat. But if it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over. In the same way, anyone who holds on to life just as it is destroys that life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal. In a letter to his family on the night before his execution, Franz wrote, "These few words are being set down here as they come from my mind and my heart. And if I must write them with my hands in chains, I find that much better than if my will were in chains. Neither prison nor chains nor sentence of death can rob a man of the faith and his free will. God gives so much strength that it is impossible to bear any suffering, a strength far stronger than any might of the world. As Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see." Franz Cedar was executed on August 9, 1943. His story had been forgotten until Gordon Zahn discovered it and wrote the book In Silent Witness in 1964 that detailed his story. Pope Benedict XVI declared Franz a martyr, and Franz was beatified on October of 2007. He said that there is a type of martyrdom that is equally significant, a silent and heroic witness of so many Christians who live the gospel without compromising, doing their duty and dedicating themselves generously to service of those in need. Where Nazism was the structural evil that Franz had to contend with, we here at Cedar Ridge are also working to contend with structural evils such as poverty, racial injustice, climate change, food insecurity, and education inequity. We are seeking to follow Jesus to make a difference in the world that becomes an opportunity for growth and an expression of God's love in us.